Welcome, everyone, to Imagining Slocan Waterfront Commons, one conversation at a time. In today's episode, we're thrilled to welcome Anitra Winje to the conversation. Anitra is a member of the Slocan Valley Historical Society and someone whose connection to this place runs very deep. She has family roots that go back generations. And so Anitra is going to bring us some personal perspective to the stories and the shifts that have shaped Slocan and our waterfront. So as we look ahead into the future of our waterfront and the visioning that's going to happen and that's underway, it's just as important to look back, to honor the people, the places, and the lived experiences that have made Slocan what it is today. So welcome, Anitra. So happy to have you with us here today. And thank you so much for volunteering your time.
No, thank you. It's my honor and pleasure to be here.
Okay, so Anitra, what are your family's earliest memories and stories of life in Slocan? And how far back does your family go in terms of Slocan history?
Okay. So I'm a fourth generation Slocan Valley resident. I don't actually live in Slocan right now, but, raised there, have property there, plan to live there, spend as much time as I can. My great grandparents homesteaded in the Little Slocan Valley in 1936. And so I've got quite a connection to Slocan on both sides. My grandfather, Anderson, my mother's father, he ran interior lake service towing. So his tugboat, the Irish G, took the barge from Slocan City up to Roseberry. So he had a very close connection to the waterfront and to Slocan Lake for many years. On the other side, the Winje side, my grandfather Winje, my uncles Richard and Aubie, and my uncle Jesse, and my father all worked at the mill. My husband's father and grandfather also worked at the mill. And interestingly, it was my grandma Winje who started the petition that eventually led to the referendum that tried to ban the mill from being built along the waterfront. She and some others felt that it was important to relocate or site that mill down the river so as not to disturb the waterfront. Of course, the referendum failed, but that civic journey, I guess, eventually led to her becoming mayor of Slocan in the 1970s. So my uncle Jesse, when he retired from mill, had the highest seniority of anyone who'd worked there. So a lot of ties to that site.
Excellent.
I'll also add, sorry if I could, that my mother was a beach supervisor at the mill or at the Brandon Beach in the early 1960s, along with her best friend Louise Osborne. So they were, sort of lifeguards, and they both also worked at the concession stand there that was run by Idaberg, and I can go into that more later. So lots of connections to that site, and that's where I learned to swim, right there, the beach.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Anitra. And for those of you who are curious, my name's Ezra Buller. I'm a counselor here in Slocan, and I'll be helping our lovely Mayor Jessica Lunn with these questions today for Anitra. I was curious, how did the local families use that waterfront area before it became an industrial site?
Oh, great question, Ezra. After interviewing my parents and Louise, there was a lot of different uses of the site. So what we're looking at right now is called Brandon Beach. So there were really two beaches. There was Brandon Beach and Town Beach, and they were bisected by Springer Creek. And of course, now Springer Creek, we can't see it as it goes into the lake because it was diverted and put into a culvert when the mill was put in the mid 1960s. But Town Beach is what we now use as Town Beach. And I was told that at that time, Town Beach was warmer, so it was preferable in terms of temperature, but that it was seen as the beach that most of the Japanese Canadians would use because most of them lived on the west side of the village. But also the train tracks were there, so it probably wasn't as appealing as Brandon Beach. There was also an old frog pond and that's where the current big clump of knotweed lives at our beach.
Mhm.
And apparently, this was quite an odoriferous body of water with frogs and things. It was quite swampy. That was later filled in. But Brandon Beach, so that ran from the east side of Springer Creek all the way to the old highway, which we now know as Slocan Street or the old Tunnel Highway. That was just a huge expanse of beach, which you can see there, sand. Was dotted with large cottonwood trees. So there was the beach. There were Clough's cabins. There were 10 of those, and they were lined up north to south. So they would have been along the west side of Slocan Street. And there used to be a Chevron station, and I remember it as a child. And it was sort of north of where the current weigh scales are on the other side of the road. And so Clough's cabins were lined up along the side of the road there. And they were surrounded by large cedar trees, which you can see in the one picture that my mother provided.
Yeah. I think we have, here's another one of Brandon Beach. And thank you for
Yes,
sharing, because that was actually a question that my husband had, was Brandon Beach. Why was it called Brandon Beach, and where was it? So it sounds like it's really was that sort of the eastern side of the waterfront.
that's right.
So this here, is that Clough's Cabins?
That's one of Clough's cabins, yes. And I believe that's my great grandmother. And I see my mother and my uncles and cousins in there. So that was a very popular place for people to come. It was like an auto court. Other relatives would come and stay for the summer there. And those cabins stayed there until about 1967, and then they were sold off. My grandfather ended up buying a couple of them. They're still in Brandon to this day. One is being lived in, the other one, I don't know what it's slated for. But a few of those are still in the community.
Okay, so um, s- uh, so Clough's Cabins, I guess they were sold off and I guess physically removed from the waterfront, so
That's
that,
correct. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. As the mill was expanded,
Mhm,
then they needed that room. And so they sold them off. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so could you share a little bit more? You mentioned that your grandmother had led the charge in opposition of the the waterfront being used for a mill. Can you share a little bit about her perspective, and if you have any information, or if you've spoken to folks about the referendum and that period of time of, obviously it was a huge community conversation,
Yeah.
much like we're moving into now, in shaping the future. But what were some of the thoughts and the perspectives at that point in time?
Well, unfortunately, I was quite young when my grandma died. I would have loved to have gotten to know her better because she was a mover and a shaker, concerned with social justice and very committed to Slocan. From what I understand, I think the thought was that it was such a beautiful asset in the community. In addition to those cabins, there were two ball fields. There was a softball field, a baseball field with bleachers. There was a curling rink, which apparently resembled the last one we had. So it was a fully enclosed curling rink. There was also a little hamburger stand. There was a cement wading pool. This place had so many amenities, and it was so well used and so well loved. On the other hand, and I've talked to my dad about this, he said at the time it was seen as a great economic boost for the community, which certainly needed it. So there was conversations about siting the mill to the south of Slocan, probably where the Johnson and Lingle mill would have been. That's around Gravel Pit Road, where the current bridge is there. From what I understand, the mill offered the town about $10,000 to build, and we want to check my facts on this, but to build a new curling rink and skating rink to sort of pay for what would be lost up there. It was interesting. My dad said, well, at the time, it was great because I'd get a job and everyone would get a job. But he said, in hindsight, it was a mistake. That's how he feels,
Mm.
having lived in Slocan. He's 77 now, because I think in hindsight, that gives you the perspective of all the tourist income that could have been generated. It's hard to reclaim something that's been lost, something that was pure, untouched, that habitat there. So there's still people that regret the loss of the mill. And I mean, certainly it was a breadwinner for my family and many others. And I grew up with that. I can still smell the fresh cut timber in my nose, and the sound, the little roar of the mill. And it formed our community, but or helped to shape and define it. But that's a part of our past, and there's always been a mill there on that property. So prior to Brandon Beach, there was the Ontario Lumber Company, which did have a mill down there as well. And interestingly, there were no relics or no signs of that my parents can recall growing up. But there was always some kind of industry there post settlement. So, there was also a planer mill it would be on the east side of the road that goes down now past the Legion. And the Bergs, Nick Berg had a mill there with Mickey Murakami, and that was a planer mill. And there were actually houses in there that were later torn down. So Paul Neidstetter, who was a very well-known Norwegian cross-country skier, he lived there, as well as Chris Berg and Nick and Ida Berg. So there was a little bit of a community in there. That would be right across from where Stogard's house is right now.
Okay.
Interesting. And what was it like growing up in Slocan with the mill as part of the community, and how did it impact those daily lives of the families that lived in Slocan then?
From my perspective, it was just always there. As I say, it's such a visceral sort of memory for me. Even going now, I can almost still smell that. And I remember visiting my dad when he was watchman. He walked me all through the mill, and I got to see the inner workings of it. And also, he worked in the shop as a heavy duty mechanic and welder. And I actually have the spiral stairs that my grandfather Winje fabricated for the shop. And I just thought it was such a magical place, full of these big machines and the roars and the hums and all of that. So I didn't know anything different. And it was when my parents started telling me about what the mill site used to be like that I conjured up these magical visions, and then getting to see the photos and talking to my parents about just what a wonderful space it was, with the curling rink and, the two ball fields and the concession stand and the cabins. I've just come to imagine it as being, one of the most evocative and welcoming spaces in the Kootenays. I mean, certainly my family said it was probably the most beautiful beach in the Kootenays. And you have Valhalla there, you have the lake, and I'm really excited to see the future of that space. It's kind of tabula rasa, it's blank slate again. But yeah, I mean, the mill was, as I say, it was as a part of who we are. I'm not ashamed of that. I mean, it fed my family on both sides and my husband's family and many others, and it kept Slocan healthy and vibrant for many years. I think it's a treasured part of our history. And I've had a recurring dream actually for the last 2 years about that mill site and what it will look like. And in my dream, it's called Mill Water. And I guess it's just, because there's always been a mill. But I have this vision of cabins there again, and a little housing development along Slocan Street, and all the wonderful things, festival spaces, and maybe a microbrewery pub called the Sturgeon. And, it's just, I'm so excited about the future.
I was interested in one of the things you were talking about is like what a beautiful place it was for so long, and it's been a mill a few different times, and I was just kind of curious on the whole idea of the referendum and how that sort of came to be. And it seems like such a wacky turn of events that actually brought the mill to that place after it had been beautified so well.
Mhm.
Just how did that go down, and sort of why was it such a strange sort of decision making process, if you could put it that way, I guess?
Ezra, I don't have as many details about that as I'd like. I think probably going back through the minutes, the village minutes might help a bit more. But I do know that there was some division, and I know that my other grandparents Anderson, so Grandpa Anderson had run the tugboat. They were so upset about the construction of the mill that they eventually sold their property in Slocan and moved to the island. The beehive burner, the fly ash, all of that. And my grandpa had a very close relationship to the water because he ran the tug for so long. He saved people's lives in Slocan Lake. He moved the barge up and down. And, in a way, they were kind of environmentalists before the term was even a thing. But I think people saw the beauty of it. I mean, my grandma Winje, certainly she helped beautify the community. She and her friend Doris planted the silver maples that are down at our beach now, those big maples. My grandma hand planted those. So, grandma was a very, anybody who knew her and her remarkable garden in Brandon, she was a master gardener. And so, she would have seen the beauty of that space. She actually started the campground. It was under her that the council opened our Springer Creek campground. So I think she had some foresight, maybe that, others didn't. But, economy versus the status quo, right? And from what I understand, it was that offering of building a new curling rink and a skating rink that sort of turned the tides, that people said, okay, you know what, we'll take those things. And, we've lived with that since, and rightly or wrongly, I'm not here to judge.
Yeah. I can only imagine the transition or the transformation if it was like pre-mill, and the deliberation. I served with Councillor Jean Patterson for a number of years, and she would describe as well the strife, and that there definitely was opposition to the mill coming in, but it was it was hard when people were struggling and there were promises of jobs and whatnot. Yeah, but so I can only imagine what it would have felt like when you describe people like moving, selling and moving, because it would have been extremely transformational at that time. So for us and our generation, it was just as transformational, I think, when the mill did close down and then they demolished the buildings, because in my lifetime, Slocan's waterfront was majority industry. With the sounds and the smells that you were describing, with the trains and whatnot, and then when the mill did shut down, it's and the buildings came down. Lots of emotion, lots happening at that time. But it was like, oh yes, we're on a lake. We're a lake community. Like it just opened up the viewscape as well. So, yeah. So what kind of challenges and opportunities do you think that are popping up or are surfacing now that the mill is gone, and it's been closed, it's been demolished, and we're in transition? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that you see moving now and into the future?
Well, a lot on both sides, actually. I think one of the challenges is, again, comes down to economics, the cost of developing that. So it's certainly, I think, going to be a long-term project. And I mean, as your council knows, it's got to be reflective of the community's needs and what the community can afford. I mean, hopefully there will be grant opportunities, all of those sorts of things. I'm not sure what kind of reclamation is needed, what kind of remediation on that site. It was heavy industry for years, so depending on what's in the soil, I don't know what would be involved there. But we have to also think about the First Nations. So the Sinixt Confederacy, now they're here in the Kootenays. I've talked to some of them, and about the pictographs along the lake and their
Mhm.
presence here. And I so think that their involvement will be essential. What their presence, they were obviously on the lake and down Slocan River at the Lemon Creek site, so that was home to them as well before settlement. I can see, we have a kiosk, as the Slocan Valley Historical Society has a kiosk down at the mill, sorry, at Town Beach, or our beach. I'm always going to think of it as Town Beach now.
Yeah.
But I can see a series of panels, on the mill site, talking about the history of that site, about, the Sinaiks' presence, and then talking about the Ontario lumber mill and all the subsequent mills, and the beach that was
Mhm.
before it turned into Triangle Pacific, or what we came to know as Slocan Forest Products. I think that would be really great to have that interpretation, so that people can understand the transformation of that site, and how it evolved to meet the needs of the community, because clearly there was an economic need in the 1960s to have that industry. I mean, let's be honest, Slocan Valley has always attracted people because of we're resource rich. We've got the timber, we've got the minerals, and that was the primary draw in the very beginning in the 1890s when people were coming here. So I would love to see that. Our historical society does not have a museum. We are bursting at the seams in our archives, which we're greatly appreciative for. But there are some artifacts that we would love to share with the community and others. And, maybe we eventually could have a small space there where people could go and look, maybe a little bit of an outdoor display, some of the things that were maybe used in mining and logging, hard to say, have pictures, the ones that we've shared here on this interpretive signage as well. I would love to see some wandering paths through some native trees and signs that say this is Douglas fir and this is cottonwood, and xeriscaping, some natural plants to keep it low maintenance, but also educate people about the incredible biodiversity of our area. I can see Springer Creek being freed or liberated from its culvert,
Mhm.
and flowing back into the lake, and talking about the fishery, the sturgeon and the salmon and the history of that.
Mhm.
And as we're working on the Mary Rake project about the Japanese Canadian internment. We don't have a lot of
Mhm.
built heritage in Slocan,
Mhm.
but we're doing our best to tell that story through the Mary Wake, the vessel, but talking about that as well. And could be a real gathering place, a community place where people can come, enjoy the water, enjoy the grass and the trees, and
Mhm.
having a festival space, right? I mean, what better space than in front of the lake, in front of the mountains?
Mhm.
We've already seen Harmony Festival down there, Unity Festival. Maybe look at having some cabins again. I think we have a shortage of accommodation stock in the community, and that could possibly be a partnership between the village and private investors. Um, there's so many boundless ideas. I mean, I think it would be so cool to have a little pub down there myself, where people could paddle up to, they could walk to, like a fishing wharf where people could go and throw their fishing lines off, and having some benches on the wharf that jet out into the lake. Interestingly, there used to be a boat launch there at Brandon Beach, so right close to where the highway is now, there was an old boat launch. So in a way, we're kind of reclaiming the space, but we're also reimagining it and making it, um, what's going to suit today and future generations' needs.
Mhm.
Yeah. Really amazing ideas, and that was sort of the last question, was sort of what are your personal sort of ideas, and I think you covered that really well. And I think a lot of people share your sort of sentiment with reclamation of the creek and that waterfront system, and a
Hmm.
place to share space together. I think that's one of the biggest appetites that we've seen recently, and the creation of a home-based space in Slocan for everybody. And
Yeah.
I think it's really amazing, and we've seen a lot of connection to the fish, and through ONA and the Synex, and a lot of local representation through schools and such like that. And it's really amazing to see people's energy right now. And I think it's
Mhm.
just exemplified by some of the words that you used today, for sure. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Ezra. One of the cool things, the ONA, they have these little mini fish nurseries. It's basically a sea can that they turn into like this aquarium, and they breed fish there. And I know they have released some fish into Slocan Lake, and they've been looking for places to site these little aquariums. And wouldn't that be cool to have one of those there where people could come and watch the baby fishes and, even be part of the release into the lake, to bring the ecology into full circle and understand what an important part that the lake has played, naturally, but also economically, right? We used to have the stern wheelers going back and forth, the barge. I mean, it's just our history is so rich. And I think we have such an opportunity to celebrate it and promote it through this site, as well as just being an incredible draw for people from near and far. I mean, I think you guys can attest to this. We've seen an incredible increase in the usage of the lake since you put that beautiful wharf in, right? Or people are coming in and using that. So we're very lucky because we have an unspoiled lake there, and we want to keep that in mind as well. That we don't necessarily maybe want to become a Lake Okanagan or a huge waterway like that in terms of busyness, but that we can have amenities like a concession where people can go and grab a freezy or a hamburger, and it would add, I think, to the diversity of the business community as well. I just, there's so many stories that people can share about that. I want to ask my Auntie Judy as well. So she was formerly Judy Graham. She was Ed Graham's granddaughter, and she actually worked in the concession with my mom. And so yeah, they lived there. I mean, my mom, her best memories are of swimming down at the lake and watching the kids walk up the tunnel road and get up on the high the bluff there right before you get to the tunnel and dive into the water. And I mean, not that I'm recommending that today, but this was
The
an
kids,
essential part of them growing up.
yeah, that is there is such a Slocan thing to do. The kids still do it. I know my kids, I've had to hold my breath.
I
So
think we
doing
all have. I think we all have.
backflips, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, excellent. So Anitra, is there anything else that you would like to share with us today? You've painted, shared so much information from the past of what was, some ideas about what could be. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
Oh, another interesting thing I found out was there used to be a tenting area on the beach, on Brandon Beach. So what would
Okay.
have been to the east side of Springer Creek. I don't think they charged anything for that. Louise Osborne remembers camping there when she was a girl. So it was just
Mhm.
this little tenting site. And there was also another hamburger stand that was in addition to the concession. And that was run in the 1950s by Zeta Hicks, who's another relative of mine, and Ida St. Thomas. So, at varying times throughout the years, there were different amenities down there. My dad talks about in 1960, there was what he called the fort. And the fort was adjacent to the baseball field. It was about 15 by maybe 10 feet long, something like that. He figures it was an old concession stand and it had been
Mhm.
abandoned. And so he used to go in there and play. And he feels that the village probably tore it down not long after because of liability concerns. But just sounded like a really cool place, something for everyone.
Mhm.
Um, People coming from out of town, or just people going down to Brandon Beach to hang out as a family, a place for family reunion, as this picture of my family attests. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, just a real something that brought community together and built community. Robert Gurin actually has a video, which I haven't seen, but of the famous donkey ball. So I think that was in the 1960s, and that's where several well-known Slocanites played baseball on donkeys, which I think was like a version of polo. And my parents still talk about that to this day. So it would be really cool if we could get a copy of that, and that would show more of the beach in Technicolor, as it were. So
Very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll have to loop back for sure. And as we move through this process, we're looking for ideas for conversation and to document and share what was. and our process of imagining what could be. So you've named a few just in terms and to learn as well. So we will be having conversations about the site, the details, some of the constraints with the environmental considerations, but in addition to that, we're bringing folks in to talk about place-based economic development and some really unique approaches of community ownerships and benefits to community, and different approaches that we could take rather than thinking of economic development as something that happens to a community and that most of the benefits go out or into private hands. So really exciting. And of course, this is all leading up to our May 24th and 25th symposium that will be happening in Slocan. We're really encouraging folks to come out to join, participate. We want to hear from all voices and all ideas. And I'm sure if we talk about it and we come together, that we're going to come up with something pretty fantastic. And as you've mentioned, the waterfront traditionally has been a place of gathering, of family, of public space, as well as economics, potential tourism or visiting or food-based activities. So I really, really appreciate your time to chat with us today and continue to get us inspired. Thank you very much. Any other questions from you? And I apologize, Ezra, I didn't introduce you at the beginning. Co-host Ezra Buller, Councillor of Slocan. Any
No
last
problem.
questions for
No, it
Anitra?
was really fun to hear her stories and see those pictures and just to imagine for myself what it was like in the pre-mill days to kind of imagine where we can go again and what opportunities we have. We know it's a great space and that there's so many ideas. It'll be awesome to hear everybody's thoughts as we get more and more close to the symposium and through the symposium as well.
Well, I had another idea, and actually, I'm loath to share it because it's so messy. But I did do a very rough sketch of what where everything was located, based on what my parents and Louise told me, and so I had this idea that maybe for the symposium, if we got a big map of the mill site, and then we could have cutouts like of the old curling rink, and then people could come and maybe place them where they thought they were. Because I'm just going based on, I mean, I don't have latitude and longitude here. I'm just sort of putting them like my dad says, north of Delaney and south of whatever. And then people could maybe even share their stories about those things. Oh, I played in the curling rink when I was a kid, or I remember staying in Clough's cabins, because the daughter of Mr. Clough, she lives in Caslo, so I would like her to come down. So that might be a cool way of collecting more stories and memories about that site and the amenities on it.
Love it. It would be like a memory mapping
Absolutely.
as we are coming together to have conversations. I love that idea, Anitra.
Okay.
Note
We could
taken.
also, encourage people, if you have photos, please send them in to us. I mean, we'd love them for the Historical Society, obviously, but for this project, it would be really beneficial because I think, like a grid project, we want to collect as many photographic evidence as we can. So that might be a way of getting those come to the forefront.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't know if you guys can hear, but I have something banging in the background. I apologize.
Sounds like a giant woodpecker.
Murphy's Law. I'm in a different office space today. So, so on that note, thank you so much, Anitra, for your time today. Thank you so much, Ezra, for your time today. And for folks who are listening, just a reminder to please join us on the symposium where we imagine Slocan's waterfront well into the future. And you can learn more at waterfrontcommons.ca. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.